Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Future of Space. I'm your host, Daniel Fox. Our guest today is Jacob Malthouse. Jacob is a globally recognized sustainability and multi-stakeholder governance expert. He is currently the executive director of the Open Lunar Foundation. Jacob, welcome to the Future Space.
Thanks, Daniel.
Well, I'm looking forward to hear about the foundation and all the people involved and the work that your team is doing. But before we go there, could you share with us, for you, what are three words that capture the essence of space?
Three words that capture the essence of space for me are community, science, and inspiration. And I put community first because space cannot happen on our own. It requires teams of people working together from all kinds of disciplines who are inspired by the opportunity that space represents.
Now, was space always an inspiration for you? Did you grow up looking up and thinking one day I want to work in space if it happens, or was it something that you kind of stumbled upon and got yourself now involved as the executive director of a major foundation?
Hmm, that's a great question. Actually, the short answer is no. I grew up very rurally, surrounded by forest. I've always felt very close to nature. And I've also been drawn to technology, funnily enough. And a lot of my career has been bringing nature and technology together. To that end, I actually don't see space as a different sector. I see it as the extension of our understanding of nature and technology and how those things weave together. I think as humans, we have a perception that nature stops at the atmosphere or outside of Earth, but actually doesn't. All these things are hugely intertwined and interrelated. The moon affects the tides, the sun warms our Earth. All these things are part of a much larger picture. And so I actually see working in space as a natural continuation of the work that I've been doing my whole career.
I've actually I believe I've written in one of my articles that I don't see why the nature of the universe would be different than the nature on the planet. If the fundamentals of how life was created on Earth, these dynamics of reciprocity, creation, destruction, tensions, this connectedness that created life on Earth, these same fundamentals exist on a much a bigger scale, but in the universe. Why would nature do something absolutely different on a tiny planet? All it does, it kind of replicates the same kind of process all across the universe on the bigger scale and on the small scale. So whatever exists on this planet should also exist out in the universe, correct?
That's right. I mean, we live in this giant interconnected system. And I think referring to spaceship Earth has actually been a mistake. We actually need to see ourselves as this cohesive whole that is part of this larger universe. And so my career has kind of been consistently working at larger scales and at large scale projects. And I hope to kind of bring that understanding to the many people who are working in sustainability in different sectors who say, oh, what, I can't work in space, or space seems different to me, or it's just the domain of engineers and technologists. And actually, that's not true. Actually, it's just change your scale, pull back, understand that all the skill sets that you have can be applied to this larger focal area, which is space and our universe. And then that enriches the discussion about how we can use space in a much wider way than we're currently using it.
Now, wrapping this kind of, because I think that you've answered the question, but I'm still going to ask you, beyond the science and the technology, the economics, the of going to space, like, what is the human story of going to space? I mean, going beyond connecting nature and continuing what we do.
You know, I had a moment a few months ago as I've been sort of deep diving into the people whose daily work, the incredible people whose daily work is space exploration. And the community that's around Open Lunar is often sending articles back and forth about space-related things. And one of the articles that was circulated around was that cave drawings in France, some of the oldest art that human beings have been known to create or that has survived to this day, had little markings on them next to the different animals. And some scientists discovered that those markings were actually a lunar calendar. And so our relationship to space dates back to understanding how the moon can tell us when the food that we rely on to continue as a species is going to be there. And the notion of community, that we would leave art for other people that might discover those caves, for ancestors to understand how to access food security through our relationship to space. And there are many stories like this, star navigators in the Pacific Ocean. Our history and connection to space is maybe something that we've lost, actually, in an industrialized society and in a society before electric lights, before we could sit inside, where the stars were confronting us every day in a very rich and wonderful fashion. And now we only see that when we're out in the wild, as you've done so much of, Daniel. Are you confronted with the immensity of the universe? And so, I believe that there is actually a bit of a journey of rediscovery that we need to go on, and reconnecting. And that's part of our process of healing our relationship with the earth and with the universe, and seeing those things together. I'm not sure if that directly answers your question still, but I would say that it is our oldest connections are with each other and to the universe.
No, I mean, I agree. I think there's a thought that I always have in my mind, that the Western societies, or even the human species, is really the youngest species on the planet, and we're a bit we're a bit immature. We're still trying to prove ourselves, but we're like the kid who decide to put aside, like, disconnect itself from its parents, because we need to establish our own identity. But then as we get older, we start to embrace more where we come back, and we don't want to dissociate with our parents anymore. We recognize what our parents give us, but at the same time, we want to be more. We want to do more. I have a feeling that this is where our species is going to now, is we're recognizing, after spending so much energy dissociating ourselves from nature, we are recognizing slowly and gradually our connection with it. And now it's more about kind of growing with it. And also, as we go to space, taking it with us. Like, we don't want to go to space and leave nature behind. Nature has to be this foundation of our future as we go beyond the planet. Now, Jacob, there's a question that I want to ask you, because you've done a lot of work in nature. You understand nature, as I've spent a lot of time in nature, and we have this belief that nature is this perfect equilibrium where everything works in harmony. When in reality, nature is this world of constant tension and disruption, this renewal between creation and destruction, where each species, ultimately ends up pushing the boundaries of their environment and trying to figure out how to move to the next phase. The human species now has pushed the environment of the planet to a point of stress. Unfortunately, do you believe that creating that place of stress is almost unavoidable when it's about getting to the next boundary, like the jumping the next step? Like, do we need to get ourselves into these places so that it creates the incentive to push those boundaries? What do you think?
Well, that's a huge question. And I think a lot of human beings over thousands of years have spent a lot of time thinking about that question, about what balance really means. I perceive your question to be, what does balance really mean, and is there balance in tension? In a way, is it balance to be unbalanced? And I do think that there is something to that. I believe that uh, if you look at yourself inwardly as an individual, if you're raising children, you'll notice that there is this constant push and pull between your children. How much risk do you want to let them take, knowing that they could get hurt, but allowing them to experience the boundaries of their own bodies, of the world around them, so that they can have an accurate understanding of the world and not one that is grounded in just your experience. And so, as a human species, we don't really have parents. We're discovering our boundaries, right? The boundaries of the world that we are in for a very short period of time, probably too short, in fact, to really understand the scales that are operating around us. And so we have to grasp looking at history, wondering about the future, discovering science to try and figure out how we can move forward in that world. And so I do think that there is a pushing against boundaries that humanity has to do in order to move forward. And that space exploration is part of that pushing against boundaries. And in fact, I think it is one of the most powerful narratives to solve climate change or to figure out balance in our Earth. Because if we truly do want to be able to expand into the stars, we need a stable home base on which to do that. We need a stable economic system. If we're fighting wars with each other, if we're dealing with mass migration, if we're dealing with mass extinction events, we can't look forward. We're forced. We're forced by the urgency of those near-term events to forget about the future and think only about the present. And it's very hard for human beings to advance in that state. If your house is burning down, all you think about is where's the water? You don't think about, should I get a degree in engineering? Should I study something? Am I having a nice balance in my life right now? Where are my kids going to go to school? All those things go away. All you think about is my house is on fire, right? So we need to have the ability to think forward and use that energy and use that as the reason to solve our problems here on Earth, instead of just thinking only about solving our problems here on Earth, thinking only about these short-term goals all the time. I hope and believe that the inspiration of a better future can be a reason for us more than just, guilt or fear, which are kind of inherently these negative emotions, for solving the problems we have here on Earth.
I I've always said that the when an organism pushes its environment to a place of stress, or when you've gotten to that limit, it creates two forces, two dynamics. The first one, it forces you to reassess how you've lived, of how it works, things that that you thought would take it for granted, now they don't work. That's incentive number one. The second incentive, which resonates with another part of the civilization, the society, it gives them the incentive to go beyond, to cross the ocean, to cross the river, to go and explore new places. If we look at, the recent, kind of the most recent mass migration was, when Europe was in total shambles in the 1500s, they had cut down all the trees, they were looking for resources. It created incentive for the kings and queens and the different kingdoms, different countries, to go and finance these expeditions that were absolutely impossible to reach for a lot of people. And then it forced people to find their solutions also back home. And now we look at, well, that incentive gave us North America where we are today, but also you look at Europe today, and it's much better than it was back then. And the place where we are today, where we've, the planet, the climate change has created this urgency, which, people like Elon Musk and others are saying that is the incentive that we need. We don't have the Cold War anymore. We need something else that gives us the incentive to go beyond, to push, to invest billions of dollars. And at the same time, you have this entire movement that is looking into, no, we cannot go over there. We have to take care of it. Like, one doesn't exist at the expense of the other. They all work together, correct?
Yeah, I believe that. I agree.
Yeah. Now, Jacob, so you work with nature now you're at the Open Lunar Foundation. You have amazing people on your board. Almost the kind of the who's who of the beginning of the space economy. You have also Chris Hadfield that's involved with the foundation. How what is the journey? How did you manage to be executive director of the Open Lunar Foundation?
It's it is a nonlinear story at first, apparently, but there is a linearity to it, which I am really grateful for, and grateful for the group of people that are around me now for helping me to realize that. When I started my career, I was very interested in, or became very interested in, what's now known as ESG, environmental, social, and governance, which is an acronym that is used commonly in the financial sector to refer to sustainability information, or information that is traditionally outside of what would appear on a balance sheet of a company. I became very interested in that because it was odd to me that people would be making decisions about whether or not to buy and sell company stocks without considering the potential environmental, social impacts that that company was having and how that might impact the company, or without really considering the governance, i.e., how the company was run, as a part of the thing that would impact that company's share price. They were essentially just using the profit margins of the company as a proxy for all those things, which felt frankly dumb to me. And as we began to investigate that more deeply, we found that what essentially there was a very set, standardized model where big institutional investors like pension funds would buy research from investment banks. And the people who ran the pension funds were trustees. They were elected into that role without a lot of background. They were reliant on service providers, management and investment consultants. And those management and investment consultants had routines, and the investment bankers had routines. And essentially, there was just a very set, stable system that seemed to work well enough. The only problem was it was resulting in a really unsustainable outcome for the planet and humanity. And so by bringing institutional investors together with the United Nations, whose job it is to think long-term, we were able to convince those institutional investors that they actually had a long-term obligation, and that the best way to achieve that long-term obligation, i.e., I'm going to retire in 30 years and need this pension, but also what kind of world am I going to retire into? The best way to convince them of that was to sit them down with the Secretary General of the United Nations, Kofi Annan, and force them to actually ask these hard questions and question whether or not just simply relying on quarterly results was the best solution to, the world that they wanted to see. And unsurprisingly, many of them agreed and said, actually, we need to be thinking more about this. And we're going to start asking questions about the people who do research for us and asking them to produce research that actually says, hey, can you try and figure this out for us? Like, what impact is this going to have on our share price? Not just in the short term, but in the long term. The amazing thing about that process was not that we pulled it off, which was incredible because we were in our 20s and really didn't have any permission to be doing what we were doing, except for a few key people who saw the greater vision. The amazing thing was now there's over $70 trillion backing that initiative 20 years later. And we thought at best we'd get to 10. And what it tells me, that lesson, seeing the arc of how that partnership and the commitments that became the principles for responsible investment, is that if you bring vision and people together to deal with what looks like a very obvious problem, but is just sort of stuck in a routine, you can change that routine dramatically. So that's a long preface, but the upshot is I became much more interested in that process than in becoming an investment banker, which was the natural sort of arc of my career, either UN official or investment banker. And both of those are like, my parents thought that would be fantastic if I did either of those things. And I chose the road less traveled, which was to think about areas and ways in which I could bring different groups of people together to change how the world worked. And I continued to follow that North Star for my whole career. The most recent iteration of that was when the .org domain was attempted, the attempted sale of the .org domain to private equity. I'm not sure if you followed this at all, Daniel, but what happened was there's a nonprofit organization that runs the .org domain. It has 8, 9 million domain names. Most of them are nonprofits around the world. It's critical nonprofit infrastructure. It's run by this nonprofit organization, and they decided, without really consulting to anyone, that they were going to sell it to a giant private equity fund for like $1.5 billion. And myself and some other people who happen to believe in things like multi-stakeholder governance of assets, especially when it comes to public goods, got very upset and started writing about it and began to organize and question whether that was a good idea, whether it was aligned with the philosophy that the internet was originally built on, and whether it was the right thing for the many millions of nonprofits who rely on that infrastructure. And why there wasn't any consultation beforehand, what the long-term impact of that was going to be, et cetera, et cetera. A long story short, we were successful in stopping the sale of .org. And I was also introduced as a result of that work to the people who are now behind Open Lunar Foundation as somebody who, through years of slings and arrows and scars and all those things, knew a thing or two about governance and bringing people together. And these people are amazing. And they said, I know you know nothing about space, but actually that's what we want. We want somebody who knows things about bringing people together, who can help the space community grow into the community that we think it can be, which is much more interdisciplinary, integrated, brings together the wealth of expertise that exists in the world to get out of the routines that it experiences now and become something that is truly inspiring for all humanity. And I was honestly super intrigued and excited about what they were doing. And the more that I got to talking to them, I was like, you know what? This is amazing. This is what I want to do for the rest of my career, in fact. And so that's what I've dedicated my life to for the past year and hopefully for many years to come.
And what does it mean in concrete words for the foundation? So obviously you're not bound to just the moon. I mean, it's called Open Lunar Foundation, but obviously the mission is much bigger than that. So how does it translate from what you just said to what is the day-to-day or yearly operations of the foundation?
Yeah, great question. So the moon is our focal point. And the reason it's our focal point is it's the first place humanity's going after low Earth orbit. It's the first place, right, where we're going to go and we're going to learn how to interact together on another planetary body. And so it's super, super important as a precedent for humanity. And how we relate to that as a foundation is ideas, new ideas, different ideas, creative thinking, expanding the idea set, expanding the opportunity set. It's so easy to become really focused on, here's an example. If you go and ask somebody, is there going to be war on the moon in the next 20 years? And I've been doing this since I started this thing. What do you think? Is there going to be a war on the moon? Yes, definitely. There will be a war on the moon, 100%. It's just a knee-jerk reaction. It's, grounded in perhaps the world we've discovered we live in post-pandemic, which is more raw, more vulnerable. But it's also not necessarily true. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. We have tremendous resources and experience around peace building, around deconflicting, huge expertise around different ways of doing things that don't necessarily result in us having wars. And the challenge is there are not many people actually investing in those ideas and building them out in such a way that they could form the groundwork for collaboration or shift the needle away from that narrative and change that narrative in a positive way. And if I compare, the space community to the environmental community has a rich and diverse array of think tanks and institutions and NGOs and thought leaders and individuals from around the world who are constantly thinking about new ideas for how we approach this. The space community has almost none of that. In fact, there are a small number of organizations, Open Lunar is one, who are trying to kind of move that dynamic and debate. And those are up against, very large established corporate interests, very large established government institutions, and a broader public perception about what space is. And so I think Open Lunar, by investing in ideas, by funding fellowships, by building those fellowships into lasting initiatives, by bringing in voices, young students, young professionals, and seasoned professionals at the end of their career to create and change that debate, we really can have an impact.
That's exactly what the future space. I mean, even my work in Field the Wild that I did, in my years of solo wilderness expeditions, was always to try to reframe the narrative of a relationship with nature. Right? I think that one of the failures, from my perspective, of the environmental movement is that we've created a narrative about our species that is extremely negative and not productive. We're a bad species. We're a cancer on the planet. Everywhere we go, we bring, the destruction. And we don't have any children, but I've worked with children, and I know that if you're constantly telling someone that they're bad, well, you don't build up their self-esteem, and it just creates this perpetuous kind of unproductive cycle. And I find myself in the same kind of conversation with a lot of people that are not space. They're always, why should we go and pollute or destroy another environment while uh, we've made so much problems here on Earth? And I'm always pushed into kind of bringing back actually to nature. Nature is a messy process by design. Evolution is messy by design. Every single we're the ones actually who are putting a moral value to a reality that every single species, impacts their environment. We're trying to do it in a way that is has a little bit more less impact, but expanding to the next town or to the next, beyond the mountain, across the river, or now, over the planet, is actually part of the learning process and us getting better. Do you feel that I mean, obviously you're in that same, you have the same mission, but have you always believed that perhaps we underestimate our capacity to do good things, or we've created a narrative that actually hasn't been productive from the environmental aspect? And maybe that's what's refreshing within the space community, that you're in the community now that believes that we can find those answers, both for the planet and for the earth. What do you think?
Yes, I agree. And I think that positive narrative is really needed for a lot of people um, who are outside of what I would frame as sort of the core of the environmental community, right? And you don't need to. I think it's a really deep and interesting question because it speaks to the what fundamentally motivates people, right? And yes, fear is a motivator, absolutely. But it's almost like sugar, you know? It's like a short-term motivator that doesn't build strong foundations. And as a result, it becomes dangerous and it results in erratic behavior and or apathy, worse, apathy, right? And I have been thinking about how we move on from that and as someone who worked for many years in environmental movements, I've had moments where I lost faith with the environmental community as a result of that negativity. Even though the environmental community is filled with amazing, talented, incredible people who I love working with, the underlying weight of it or the responsibility that you feel that you carry can be very difficult. And I've spoken about this with many colleagues in that sector. So I do think that we need to come to a place where we have a different narrative about human progress and that the problems we face are fundamentally about how we organize, how we regulate, how we invest in new technology, how we work together as a species, and that those are all solvable problems. They are solvable problems, and the only issue is how quickly we go about solving them. Yeah, and I do think it's very difficult and confronting if you really put yourself in the shoes of someone who is, say, in the oil and gas sector, right? And then you have a chat with them and they're talking about what they need to do. And you know, in the back of their heads, they're like, you're trying to evaluate, is this person the person who's going to fish the last whale? And are they actually, trying to create change? And what does that look like for them? Most people who work in the oil and gas sector are not bad people. They're just good people trying to earn a living. And I put gas in my car, right? Unfortunately, I don't have an electric car. And there are people that argue about the impacts of electric cars, right? And whether we should use them. But ultimately, I have been witness to, and in my lifetime, tremendous social change and been a part of creating that social change. And my fear is that we fall victim to the world that says, oh, there's nothing I can do. The government is structured in this way. The financial system is structured in this way. These are huge systems that are impossible to change. The oil and gas money is going to continue to lobby against change. We're just, it's, going to be game over for us. None of that is true. Honestly, none of that is true. Actually, what I experienced was that the financial system is incredibly malleable, hugely malleable, actually. I think people are saying a phrase that I've heard quite a lot, and maybe you've heard this as well, is we're at late stage capitalism. End days capitalism, late stage capitalism. I do not believe that. I actually think we have barely started figuring out capitalism. Barely started. Like we only left the gold standard maybe 60, 70 years ago. I can't remember. Like, think about the course of like human history. That's a blip that we've kind of figured out how to decouple money from the amount of gold in the ground, which is just a random mineral. We're super, super early stage as a species that's trying to manage a globally integrated system. We're like this is like 8-year-old capitalism. It's kind of where we're at. That's why it seems so crazy, right? That's why it seems so like unstable uncertainty. It's like really young, not late. And what that should tell us is that, gosh, we can do all kinds of stuff, all kinds of surgery to figure this stuff out and do it differently, and all kinds of new inventions that can, change the way the systems worked. Actually, quite easily, in fact. Probably 500 or 1,000 years from now, we'll have it figured out. It'll be much harder, but also maybe we'll be living in balance and we won't need to, and we'll have other problems that we're dealing with, right? So, yeah, sorry, it's a very long answer to your question, but I think it gets down to this real point of like understanding where we are in history helps us think clearly about our ability to have impact and not just be frozen by this view that everything is built and there's nothing we can change.
The every time I did my and it that statement has come about in my book and a lot of my podcasts. But every time that I did my solo wilderness expeditions, part of my creative process was always to first of all find myself living with people that were at in these locations, because in my belief, I always thought that it would be arrogant to think that I could be a visitor and capture the spirit, the energy of those locations just by coming with my expectations and then looking to reinforce what I thought were things. And instead, I wanted to connect with the people that live there. And through sitting at the table and sharing a meal, through living with them, then they would tell me, oh my god, I would hear their stories, and then they would tell me, you have to go and speak with so and so, and then all, and through their eyes I discovered those places. But the biggest lesson that came out of that process was, you realize that a lot of these individuals, I would not agree with everything that they believed, but we're all the same. I discovered that the human story is what connects us all, right? We all want to put food on the table. We all want to be valued. We all want to give a future to our children. And then after that, things get complicated. But part of the failure of the movement that we're talking about is that we come to the table accusing people, the others, that they're being bad on purpose or doing the wrong things. And I'm married, I have a wife, and I understand the laws of negotiations and communication. And if you come to the table accusing someone, automatically, even if the other person would want to agree with you, you've put them on the place of defensive, and now they have to defend themselves rather than kind of, trying to work out a solution. And it's, if collectively we can change our optic of understanding the complexity of the world, that there's no, I think that it doesn't come from a place of righteousness, but a place of understanding connections, the connectedness of the world, where each individual is trying to do the right thing, but we have different beliefs, different perspectives. Then there's room to grow, as opposed to, I mean, even as opposed to pushing people aside. Even climate change, for me, the debate, or the horse that the climate change movement has decided to grow on, is really polarizing. It says the people that have power right now, we want to keep that power, and we want the status quo there, and it's, while we have other people around the planet that are looking, actually they will benefit from climate change, and they're not really inclined of getting in that bandwagon, because they're looking at from a different perspective. If we can create a narrative that is more inclusive, that is not trying to divide but rather unite, I think that this is where the solutions are coming from. Because I think there are we have 8 billion people on the planet, and there's a lot more good work than negative that is being done. And the fact is that our world is not that bad, considering all the complexity, the complexities and the challenges that we have. I mean, this is, for me, this is a belief that is extremely at the core of my individual, and I think that's something that drives also the work that you do at the foundation. Correct?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I think it's the there's your point about sitting in a room with someone when you're in a foreign place, and the natural instinct of that person is to help you in some way. Oh, you should go see this place. It's really nice. Um, Watch out for this area. It's not very good. Make sure that you wear sunglasses on this day, or whatever it is. People are this incredible natural inclination to help one another, and travel is such a great, especially solo travel, is such a great way of experiencing the generosity and community that exists in the world. And every time I've gone on solo trips like that, I've always been overwhelmed with how fundamentally good human beings are. And I think that optimism has kind of carried throughout my career. And so I think in a way you kind of extend that. If you have in the back of your head this anchor that all these incredible people are doing nice things for one another and working away on making the world a better place quietly, it's this huge family and this incredible momentum. And all Open Lunar does is just kind of helps enable that in our small way in this small part of the world by saying, yeah, you're going to go away for 6 months, and I want you to think about a hard problem, and we'll give you some support to do that. And this is a hard problem that is sourced in conversation with people who are just talking about these issues and thinking, be like, it'd be really nice. This is a hard problem. We haven't solved that yet. We should think about that some more, right? So it's quiet work over a period of time that creates that change. It's not, we're often as humans, I think, tricked into this notion that like one protest or one person or one thing or one event is the trigger, and that needs to happen for change to occur. Actually, that's like the reason it's news is it's exceptional. Most change is just one foot in front of the other consistently over a long period of time, resulting in huge progress.
Yeah, the overnight success myth is common, and but the reality is that everybody who is portrayed as an overnight success, they're always like, overnight success that took 20 years of constantly going at it. When I was interviewing Chris Bosshausen, like his 3 words of wisdom were it takes time. It's nothing gets done overnight, and it's always one step in front of the other. And yes, you have these one case in a million of someone who just happens to be exactly at the right place at the right time, and for some reason they just basically everything clicks. But for 99.99% of everything in life, it is just hard work of pushing. And unfortunately, often the ones who do end up making it are not always the best solutions, or just they're the most resilient and the most tenacious and going through. There's I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts on this, but I look forward to the day where I'm going to look up into the sky on the night of a new moon, or even during the day when you see the moon in the sky, and actually see lights on the moon, where there's going to be a visual representation of human settlements out of out of Earth. And the reason some people will say, well, we have the international station going around, but the international station, unless you know exactly what you're looking for, it's just this tiny dots in the sky that moves, and it's there's no there's not a big connection there. But looking up for me would be a moment of realization that this is how far we've come, and this is the beginning of such a new era. A lot of people that when I hear that, they're like, this is going to be the craziest thing. I don't want the moon to be disturbed ever, because like this, we're so awful. I, I can't wait. I can't wait to see lights on the moon. Are you on the can't wait, or you don't want you don't want lights on the moon?
Yeah, this is an excellent question. I I personally I personally want to wait until we're we've had a conversation about what that means. So what I would love is that when there are lights on the moon that humanity can see, that the way we interpret that as not a negative thing, but as a positive thing in the way that you're saying. And I think it depends a little bit on who's involved, what they're doing. Like, what is that light? Is it a military installation? I don't know. Is it a mining enterprise? Like, what is that? Or is it a scientific endeavor, right? Is it all of those things? Are there multiple lights in different places? What happens up there? And I think that the important thing that you've highlighted is what's happened up there in some ways will be a reflection of humanity. And I would love for those lights to reflect something that we can be proud of. When we look up at those lights and we say, wow, there are some really talented, incredible people involved in that effort. And it's so amazing to see that we collectively have achieved that. And then I'll be happy when I see the lights. That's in some ways like what the reaction is to those lights when that happens 10, 20 years from now will be the ultimate have I done my job or not indicator.
I have a project, an idea that maybe we can work at that. Maybe the first lights that we're going to see on the moon is an art project where it's going to be these solar panels that reflect light, and together it's a giant installation, but it creates a smiley face, a smiley, a smiley face, so that when you look up, you're just going to see a big smile in little eyes, and that would be the introduction of our presence on the moon. That's my idea.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a wonderful exercise. It's a wonderful thought exercise to think about, right? Like what is this, what if we could send a message back from the moon visually, what would it be? Could it be a smiley face? Is it a heart? Does that then kick off a whole or will it be something divisive? And what will that mean? Will it be a religious symbol, right? And then what does that tell us? And when we have competing religious symbols on the moon, right? These are really important questions. And I think they require us to think deeply about what do we want to create and what precedents do we want to set. What you say is like in some ways a very like optimistic view, but underlying it are choices, deep choices about how we as human beings are going to interact with something that most of us can't change and have to just kind of live with. And so by discussing them now, by thinking about them now in advance, we can actually end up in a better place, a place of intentionality. And you're exactly right. Maybe we decide actually what we want is like a symbol of community, a symbol of love, a symbol of happiness up there. The challenge will be who's going to feel left out of that discussion and why? And why have we left them out? And can we avoid that?
Now, Jacob, you've had a career of making the impossible work, working long term. This is, obviously what the board of the Open Lunar Foundation saw in you. You also have the opportunity of working with people extremely amazing in their career, like Chris Hadfield and others. So, from your perspective and your belief, what would be your 3 words of wisdom for anyone who's listening?
3 words of wisdom. This is a good question. And it's hard to boil wisdom into 3 words, but also very important. Give me a second. I would suggest, for me, what's worked well, faith in people. There are lots of things that hang off of that, but I've always had faith in people, and it's almost never steered me wrong. And when it has steered me wrong, I've learned things. And so actually that has increased my faith in people.
I love it because I agree 100% in it. So I think that the work that you do and the work that we do with Future Space is ultimately it's that it's yes, space is a topic. For years, nature, with Feel the Wild was the topic, but ultimately the message in all of it is faith in people and their capacity to rise in the worst of times, and to give ourselves a credit and understanding that life is messy and we may have to make mistakes. And if we understand and value failure in the concept of innovation and technology, we also have to understand it in the concept of the individual and the society and the culture, right? If the we're constantly reassessing ourselves to see what works and what doesn't work, and what worked 10 years ago don't necessarily work today. And now we have to reassess, and change is hard. And if change is hard for me, imagine how it is for 8 billion people on the planet. But ultimately, the reason why we're 8 billion on the planet is not because we're a bad species, is because we have a tremendous capacity to find these solutions that allow us to do better than worse. Because if the equation was opposite, we would not be 8 billion. We would be we would be kind of still feudal and just all tribal and killing each other and barely making lives. So our numbers is a testimony on our capacity to rise and face the challenges. And space, we use space now as that metaphor. We use nature. But yes, I love your 3 words of wisdom. Thank you, Jacob.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Thank you for the opportunity today.
Looking forward for our next conversation, and when our path across in real life.
Sounds good. Take care.
Take care.